From the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., this is Update One, the club's official podcast. It features newsworthy stories originating from the NPC facilities, as well as broader topics related to journalism, communications, press freedom, and transparency.
I'm Adam Konowe, co-chair of the National Press Club's broadcast podcast team. Joining me is Jon Ostrower, editor-in-chief of the Air Current, a subscription-based news outlet that has won numerous awards for journalistic excellence, including as recently as last month in London. Jon, welcome to Update One.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start at the beginning. What sparked your interest in aviation and the same for journalism?
Well, it's funny. I grew up in a household that was obsessed with news. Aviation sort of came a little bit later. My parents were news junkies. My grandparents were very politically active, very politically aware, and I grew up with CNN on in the background of their home through my entire childhood. And so I was constantly being exposed to what was going on in the world. And we always had we had newspapers, and so it was impossible not to be immersed in it. It wasn't something that was secondary to my childhood. It was integral to how I learned to be a person. And so being around news and immersing myself in it was so central. But on the aviation front, it's all just me. I'm the only aviation junkie in my family. But I've also, from my earliest days, I have loved things that fly. Always fascinated me. And so I found a way to combine those two. So I went to school at George Washington University, very proud graduate of the School of Media and Public Affairs in political communication. And that afforded me the opportunity to combine the two. My senior thesis was actually the combination of civil aviation and how it was used as a presentation of national image, and how nations used things that fly to present themselves to the world. So I was on a political communication track. I took the Foreign Service exam. I passed the first leg of it, and so I was fascinated by all of the intersection of these. It wasn't until after I graduated that I got the chance to actually be a journalist, very much by accident. And I started a blog about airplanes, Flight Blogger, and that carried me through into being recruited by Flight Global in the end of 2007, and the rest is history.
I want to talk about that beginning of your aviation journalism career at Flight Global. You talked about Flight Blogger. That was early days of blogging. So what was it like working for, a UK-based outlet in the Americas, but also those early days of blogging, and how did that inform, your approach as a journalist covering that beat of aviation?
Well, it was sort of like it was the Wild West in those days. I mean, you walked into an event and people ask, "Are you a blogger or are you a reporter? Is a blogger a journalist?" And in the way I viewed it back then was, this is just a piece of paper. It doesn't matter. Like, it's another type of media and you can fill it as a vessel with whatever you choose. It can be cat videos and recipes, or it can be hardcore reporting, and it's all a matter of the medium rather than sort of the expectation around what a different type of medium has to be against the traditional norms. And so it was a huge learning curve introducing social media and more personalized, not personality driven, that's the wrong way to describe it, but more byline centric, is probably a polite way to put it, way of doing journalism at a time when aerospace and defense, not exactly known for their progressive communication skills. This is your very buttoned up companies. They're very there's sort of an inherent resistance there to new forms of anything, and so there was a learning curve. And I have the infamy of sending the first tweet from inside a Boeing factory, and Boeing, they will tell you the story. They freaked out because their policy was no live broadcasts from inside the factory, and they considered sending a tweet from inside the factory a live broadcast. So we all learned together, and it came along at a time where social media was changing things so rapidly. It was very like Web 2.0. I think we're on Web 4.0 now, right? It kind of iterates itself over and over again. But that was such a formative time in media and communications because, frankly, everyone was just trying to figure it out. Yeah. And, frankly, we're still trying to figure it out, just kind of different point on the curve.
from there, you went to the Wall Street Journal. Talk about the shift from going from a trade media outlet to one of the biggest, most established mainstream business publications in the world.
That was a jarring shift. I will fully and freely admit that going from a weekly magazine and a very digital-focused, social media oriented publication to the supertanker of the Wall Street Journal, which amazingly, because of its incredible editors and reporters, comes together 6 times a week in just this incredibly polished, world-beating paper of record. And the one fascinating thing, the many fascinating things that I learned in that time, but the one that really stood out in those early years was that what I had to do was, I knew aviation, I knew my beat, but I had to learn the paper and the institution that I was existing in. And that learning curve was really, really steep. Like, I didn't go to journalism school. I was a political communication grad. I had one journalism class under my belt. And literally, I felt like, dropped in the deep end on how to be an honest-to-goodness, newspaper reporter. And it just filled out a part of my brain that just didn't exist at that point. But man, oh man, that was a lot of on-the-job learning.
That ended up at CNN, the very outlet that you talked about having watched in your childhood. What was that like?
That was incredible. And so I left the Journal in 2016, fall of 2016, and I wanted to try something totally out of my comfort zone. And I generally don't like being on TV. I don't like cameras. I just it never felt very unnatural to me. And so I wanted to get over that. And that was part of my reasoning. And so it was an opportunity to try and tie all the pieces together. Like, growing up at CNN, like Miles O'Brien and John Holloman, just legends, really informed my sort of, like, that's the way I grew up. They were my role models. Like, watching them report on space and aviation was like, oh my God, they're giants. And so to be at CNN and do that same reporting was really, really fascinating, because it also gave me a chance to see this new side of media. And look, I mean, the Miles O'Brien, John Holloman era at CNN was very different in terms of the internet, in terms of economics, in terms of the world, versus when they were doing it when I was coming along in 2016, 2017. And CNN was changing. They were coming off of a enormous bounty from the 2016 presidential campaign, where there was enormous amounts of spending by advertisers, and so there was a huge hiring push that went on that year. And so I was part of that. And it also afforded me an opportunity to see, again, how that side of the business works in terms of digital and TV and all of that. I got laid off 18 months later, because what ends up happening is organizations that grow too quickly come down hard on the other side. And there were a whole lot of different forces at play for why 50 of us got laid off in February of 2018, not the least of which was a bad investment that they had made on a YouTuber that didn't quite pan out, that the journalists had to pay for.
I want to talk about that. That, to me, is the biggest leap that you've made, albeit opportunity out of adversity of the layoff. You created the Air Current in May of 2018. Subscription-based media, especially in the trade world, and the Air Current, I think, straddles that world between mainstream and trade, but subscription-based media was certainly in its infancy relative to where it is even now, and I would say it's still evolving now, right? What made you believe that there was viability in doing that in 2018?
It's a great question. And so I had just spent, from 2007 to 2018, so 11 years. So I was a blogger, I was a magazine reporter, I was a newspaper reporter, I was a TV journalist, digital journalist. I had seen almost every slice of the pie, in terms of how the media landscape works. And what I realized was, as the more specialized you got, the more intimate the relationship with the reader needed to be, because fundamentally those who valued the information the most, whether it was in the investment community or in industry or government, they had a distinct need for that, and that distinct need created ultimately a commercial demand. Right? That was the relationship. But in that same time, what I also saw was an erosion of attention spans and a lack of respect for people's time. Where if you're going to read something and it's surrounded by ads, which are fundamentally designed to distract you from the thing you've clicked in to read, you're diluting the product. But in this case, the product is not the content. The product is the eyeballs, the ability to deliver advertiser information to a reader. So I had to turn it on its head. And so starting out from a team of one, and we're a team of four now and growing heading into the second half of the year, that the relationship has to be between the content and the reader, and understanding what your product is requires you to try to understand what the incentives are built into an advertising model, built into a subscriber model, and ultimately, if it's an advertising model, then your goal is volume. And I, as an individual, just out of sheer necessity and reality, could not produce the amount of content required to satisfy a volume-based advertising model.
Does that also fit in with your decision? Recently, you joined with two other aviation writers to create a podcast called The Airshow, and you're sort of the airplane guy, and then there's one who plays, comes at it from the airline side and so forth. Yep. What was the thinking behind joining forces with others on a podcast when, arguably you have a strong brand in your name and a strong brand in the air current?
Well, it's funny. So Brett Snyder, Brian Summers, brilliant guys, and we've been Brett Snyder, Brian Summers, brilliant guys. We for a while had wanted to do something together, try to figure out what that might be. It's funny. I don't think it occurred to me at the time, but after we finished recording our first episode, Brian says to me, "So how does it feel to be on the other side of the paywall again?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's a good point. I haven't had an open piece of content landscape for me in a while." And so what the strategy that informed a lot of that was, I'm not anti-advertising. I think that's really important. I think it has the air show is an advertising-based business model. That's okay because we have the ability to reach a lot of people and reach the right people against that. And I think that it balances out. I think it's all a matter of what models work depending on the audience, depending on what the content is. It has to be tailored. And so, but I also wanted to keep any advertising-based venture or partnership separate from the air current. That was really important because the air current is not advertising-driven; it's all subscriber-driven, and so that allows us to just keep the team also insulated from the natural things that happen when you start having advertiser conversations, and even I've kept an arm's length around that for all the obvious reasons, where it's like, okay, that's the business model, and we have someone who does the business side of that for us, and that works really well. But they are fundamentally separate. But to expand also, I think it's been a wonderful platform for the air current, and I know that we've actually had a commercial benefit as a result of it. Certainly, people are aware of what we do even more, and we can connect with a lot of folks that we otherwise couldn't in an individual subscriber model. Our subscription business model has worked really, really well for the air current, and I have zero intention of going in a different direction on that, principally because I think it's the model that is most reflective of the modern media landscape in terms of actually reaching the people you want to reach and having them value the content that you create.
You and I were in the UK last month for the biennial Farnborough International Airshow, one of the largest aviation industry events. With more than 1,000 exhibitors, how do you decide what to cover without over-indexing on something obvious like Airbus versus Boeing?
It's a great question. So early on in my career, I used to spend the week at the big air show feeling guilty. Like, I can't, like, I'm missing so much. I can't see everything. This is like, oh, I can't, I get so frustrated. Like, oh, I can't be here and here at the same time, and time conflicts and all that. And so what I did over time, and I think this is something that is reflective of how we operate at the Air Current, we don't have the scale or reach or resources as some of our competitors do in mainstream media, who have, 10 reporters and they can all go to different events and all that, and there's a huge flow of news and they're chasing orders and announcements and all that. So what we very deliberately had to do, because I think that the scale of the publication also has to inform the type of reporting, because you're not going to cover everything. There's no way. Even if you have a team of 30, you're not going to be able to cover everything at an air show. So what we decided to do many years ago, and it's really, really worked for us, is that we really wanted to focus more on one-on-one conversations than going to press conferences. Because it comes back to sort of the baseline of our model, which is that we have to be offering something that you're not going to see anywhere else. And if you're in a press conference with a lot of other folks, they're getting exactly the same quotes that you are and the exact same information. So you have to kind of use the better mousetrap that you've created to maneuver in an environment where there are people who want to have conversations with you and things they don't want to say in a press conference. And effectively, it's, we treat it as sort of as an environment for cultivating the relationships we have, building new ones. But again, like, from a new media priority, like, I tell my team, like, the amount of news that comes out of an air show is huge. And in many ways, there's only going to be one or two, maybe three big stories that people will remember from the week. So if you don't write at the air show and you spend that same time talking to folks and cultivating bigger stories that come out the following week, let's do that. And it's about a recognition of our scale and how we can be most impactful and not get lost in the noise. Not noise, in the mass of news that comes from an air show. I mean, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories get written, and it's like, how do you distinguish yourself in that environment when there's just this incredible gush of information. And my main story from the air show didn't come out until the following Friday after the air show, because I wanted time to digest and think and put everything together that I had seen and learned.
To that end, you and your team have won numerous awards, including one last month in London at the Aerospace Media Awards. Full disclosure, I lead the event's judging panel. During your acceptance speech, you went out of your way to remind industry that if they value the work of you and your peers, then it has to be supported better than it is currently. What's your take on the state of journalism as a business?
This is what keeps me up at night. I spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about how to survive in the landscape that we're in right now. And I don't ascribe to the idea that there is I think we're way past the point of purity in this business. I think we have to think about the business models and the content together. And there are ways to keep those respectful of one another and how one can serve the other and in both directions. And I think that you really have to understand your audience and what they want and what they need. And I think that allows you to create a model directly from that. And what I think the state of journalism right now is very perilous. I mean, that's not exactly breaking news, right? I mean, we like, the layoffs are happening all over the place. I think that what we've seen thus far is that the wrong people are owning publications. And we see this over and over and over again. And it's like, this is the purity that I think this requires is you have to love either your subject matter and the medium in which you exist. You have to love news. You have to love news gathering. And so we see, private equity. We see VC. We see, arms of weird companies owning publications, and you say, to what end? And then they either don't invest or they try to cut it to ribbons, and it's like, why are you here? Do you understand the purpose of what this is supposed to achieve? And so what we see now is we see publications that are owned by its reporters. And I bootstrapped the Air Current. We are a zero debt business, which is something that I'm incredibly proud of. It just takes time and patience. This is not a business that is going to deliver an overnight rapid return, though returns are absolutely possible. We are a profitable news organization and growing and have ambitions for being much larger than we are right now in a sustainable way. I know this is sort of anathema to, unheard of it in this business, but it has required a lot of very deliberate strategic engineering, which goes hand in hand with how we cover what we cover.
We're here in the heart of the National Press Club, and apologies for any background noise that there may be. This is known as the world's foremost organization for journalists. Half its members are communicator members rather than journalists. So how can PR practitioners be helpful to you? And frankly, what do they do that drive you crazy?
There is a massive power imbalance that exists in this world with respect to communicators, journalists, and in terms of the amount of resources that are available to either side of that equation. I'm fortunate enough to teach a class at the University of Southern California, and it's accident investigation preparedness. And my responsibility for the 4.5-day class is the media module. And the person who taught it before came at the class trying to explain to those who were developing their emergency preparedness plans about how to talk to the media and how to maneuver in that world. And I actually did it from the opposite side. I said, okay, I want you to come away from this day understanding how the media thinks. What are its priorities? What incentives are at play? How does that work against the content landscape, the news landscape, all the pressures that a journalist is under on any day? Well, the editor is stretched thin, people parachuting in on a beat, all that. And one of the key pieces of that is about how you do media relations. And I have a slide that says media relations starts with a cup of coffee. Because fundamentally, this is a business that is about relationships. And news gathering is about trust and building those relationships. And so sitting down with a cup of coffee when there isn't a story to pitch and there isn't a crisis to manage, to really begin to understand who you're talking to, and they understand what you're looking for and understand how you think about the world, that affords you an opportunity to really build something deeper. And whether it's someone who's mid, late, early career, it doesn't matter. That holds true. That you have to slow down to have the relationships. You can't constantly be looking at everyone around you as a target-rich environment where there's something to extract. Like, that's not how the world works. I mean, I think for some media organizations, some journalists, yes, I think maybe that's how they operate. I think there are diminishing returns on that over time, right? And people see that. You have to build relationships, and I mean, look, I really like people. I really do. I like it. I am no misanthrope, and so to meet people and learn about who they are and what drives them and what their goals are. It's just something I really enjoy. And so in terms of coming back to your bigger question about PR folks versus journalists, it's really about building those relationships. And I think that coming back to this power imbalance where we're outnumbered 6, 7, 8 to 1, I think it's that the best relationships that I have as an individual and that my team has are ones where there isn't an expectation of something, coverage. Be like, I'm just dropping a press conference. I'm just dropping a press release into your inbox, for example, and you're just going to flip that around, and that's the relationship. It's like, no, that's not what we're here for. And so taking that time and building those relationships is so important. And frankly, I think probably here in your world that the most rewarding relationships professionally are the ones where you can sit and have a conversation, where it's, as opposed to, okay, what is this? What's the arrangement here in terms of a transaction of some kind? And I think that's, that works.
You're certainly known for your sources, and I think that's evidence of that in what you just said. Last question. You're here in Washington to cover a National Transportation Safety Board meeting. What was the topic, and what do you look for in events like that?
So we were here, myself and my colleague Will Geisbond, who joined us in January, is our man in D.C., covering the Hill, covering regulation, business aviation, general aviation here in Washington. We were at the National Transportation Safety Board hearing for Alaska Airlines Flight 1282, which was a 737 MAX 9, which lost a plug door at altitude. Subsequently, the Boeing airplane was grounded for almost a month, and spawned major changes at Boeing, and it was a kind of a postscript on the investigation. And so there were 20 hours of hearings over 2 days, and so there's a lot to digest. And we spent a while in the week leading up to this point asking ourselves, how do you cover 20 hours of hearings? And what we decided on was more of kind of a live blog model. We're known for we're slow news, right? We're deep reporting, long form, but we decided to do it this way because we knew that we wanted to digest it as we went also, because if we were going to take the time and effort to do this and be there for 2 days, we knew that there were nuggets and observations that were going to come out over time, over those 2 days. And it's really hard to encapsulate that in a long-form article that people can digest in a way that is still timely. Because the news environment for covering Boeing as of this year is there's something new every 24 hours. And so how do you add value for your audience? How do you give them an explanation for what's gone on? How do you find nuggets and observations and insights within all of this that are different from your competitors? Because we're absolutely competitive about our coverage area, and so working in that environment allows us to we were in the room, we were you get a chance to pull there's a 10-minute break, you can just walk up to anyone and ask them a question. And so there is no substitute for being there. That is sort of foundational for us. But also you get so much by seeing the ambiance in the room, feeling how it's all unfolding and all the little things around the edge. So I think a live blog model really worked really well for that. But yeah, I think it was the first time we've done that. I think in 6 years. I think it's worked really well for us. We'll probably try that again.
Jon, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Adam.
Jon Ostrower is editor-in-chief of the Air Current and a host of the Air Show podcast. You can learn more at theaircurrent.com and hear the Air Show on most podcast platforms. For Update 1 in Washington, I'm Adam Konowe.
You have been listening to Update 1, the official podcast of the National Press Club, the world's leading professional organization for journalists and a vigorous advocate of press freedom worldwide. If you have any questions or comments about Update 1, send an email to update1podcast@gmail.com.